Okay, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Rabbi Sai, those who are here in the Kollel and those who are tuning in from the Zoom. So this year, of course, Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, and that brings up a number of differences in almost every area that relates to preparation for Pesach and Pesach itself. And because this is such a rare kvius, it's such a rare occurrence that Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, so it's important to review the unique differences that apply this year. For those of us who don't remember what happened last time this took place, it was a long time ago, but don't be disheartened. The Gemara tells us that the Bnei Beseira, who were the heads of the Sanhedrin, the Nesiim, so they didn't remember the halacha whether in fact the Korban Pesach could be brought on Shabbos of Erev Pesach, and it took Hillel to remind them that indeed the halacha is that it's brought. So if we don't remember all of the halachos from last time, that's okay. Yeah, halacha is we bring the Korban Pesach. So if we don't remember all the halachos from last time, no problem. That's why we have Sfarim, we have books which have all of the halachos, and we have, Baruch Hashem, a plethora of shiurim that are available discussing the unique halachos of this year's kviyos. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to pretty much in the order of the dates. We're going to go in chronological order, going day by day, highlighting what are the specific halachas that apply to that day. So for those coming in online, I'm going to put up on the screen the chart, the document that we're going to be using. Feel free to follow along with us, and that will make it somewhat easier. Just getting the text set up. Okay, we'll bring it up on the screen now. Please feel free to follow along. Okay, so we're going to start off with this upcoming Shabbos. Usually the Shabbos before Pesach is known as Shabbos Hagadol, and there are different reasons why it is called Shabbos Hagadol. One of them is because this is the Drasha Hagadol, the great Drasha of the year. Rabbis used to only speak twice a year on Shabbos Shuvah and Shabbos Hagadol, or before every Yom Tov. And the focus of the Shabbos Hagadol, the way the Alter Rebbe writes, is not to speak pilpul, not to speak lomdus, deep Torah ideas. It's about giving over practical halacha. Leides ha'maaseh asher yasun, the people know what they need to do. Now, if that's the purpose of the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha, there's no point having the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha on Erev Pesach, because by then it's too late. It's too late for people to do Bedikas Chometz, Biur Chometz, etc. And therefore, in such a kviyus, the Alter Rebbe tells us in Shulchan Aruch, that the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha is said on the Shabbos before. So that will be this coming Shabbos Parshas Vayikra on Zayin Nisan. That will be the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha, where the Rav teaches the halachos of Pesach and would probably focus on these halachos as well. With regards to the other minhagim of Shabbos Hagadol, whilst there are some people who would say the piyutim of Shabbos Hagadol on this Shabbos, but in most kehillas, all of the other minhagim of Shabbos Hagadol are observed on the regular Shabbos Hagadol, being the day before Pesach. This year, the Shabbos immediately prior to Pesach. So that's with regards to the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha, but as we'll come to later, all of the other minhagim of Shabbos Hagadol itself. So moving on chronologically, the next day is Tainis B'chorim. We know that on Erev Pesach, there is a minhag, it's a custom, it's not sourced in the Gemara. There's a minhag that B'chorim firstborns fast on Erev Pesach, and that is, of course, because Hashem saved the Jewish firstborn when he killed the Egyptian firstborn with Makas B'choris. And usually when that falls out on a weekday, there's no problem. There's no problem to fast on a weekday. But when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, one is not allowed to fast on Shabbos, with the exception of Yom Kippur, which is D'Oraisa, it's a biblical fast. But all other fasts, we don't fast on Shabbos. Now, in this instance, we don't push back the fast to a Friday. We don't do the fast on a Friday. Instead, the fast is done on Thursday. And the reason is because we don't want to come into Shabbos in a state of being mu'una. Person shouldn't unnecessarily come into Shabbos in a state of affliction, and fasting does that to a person. So instead, the fast is observed on Thursday. Now, what's interesting is the Mechaber in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Taf Ayin, writes two opinions what happens in such a year. The first opinion is, like we said, that the fast is observed on the Thursday of Yud Beis Nisan. The other opinion the Mechaber brings, Yesh Oimrim, that in such a kviyus, in such a year, there is no fast at all. There is no fast of the firstborn at all. Now that seems very, very popular. However, the Ramah writes that our minig is like the first opinion, and firstborns would fast on the 12th of Nisan. However, being that there is an opinion that the fast is pushed off completely, we are more lenient in how this fast is treated. Now, generally speaking, we're very lenient with this fast anyway, that whereas other fasts, you can't just hear a siyum and eat, but on this fast, the firstborn can hear a siyum and be able to eat. In this year, even those who don't usually rely on hearing a siyum, there are many people who go to hear a siyum, but then continue fasting the rest of the day. Some people do that, but in such a year where there are those who say there is no fast at all, in such a kvius, then they can rely on that to hear a siyum. Similarly, if someone is feeling unwell, then we can certainly rely on the opinion that says in such a year there is no fast, and a person, if needs be, can break their fast. The interesting halacha that the Achronim bring is that what happens if a person has a son who is a firstborn? We know if a person has a son who is a firstborn, then the father fasts in place of the son. What happens if the father and the son are both firstborn? So Shulchan Aruch brings an opinion that the mother fasts on behalf of her son before the age of bar mitzvah. And certainly in such a year, the women can rely on the opinion that there is no fast and they wouldn't need to fast. But most of this is a mute point because I presume that most of the Bechorim will make sure to attend a siyum. But to remember that the siyum this year will be on Thursday, Yud Beis Nisan, which is the day of Tainis Bechorim. Which leads us on now to Thursday evening, which is early Yud Gimel Nisan, and that is the Zman of Bedikas Chometz. Now, the mitzvah of Bedikas Chometz is a mitzvah midrabanan. We're not allowed to own any chometz on Pesach. Biblically, it's enough to be mevatel one's chometz. One is allowed to make their chometz hefker, and biblically that would suffice. However, the rabbis were worried that a person might find chometz in the house and come to eat it, and they said, therefore, you have to search your house from top to bottom and make sure that there is no chometz left. And we all know how we do the Bedikas Chometz. The minig of placing 10 pieces, that's just a minig. The main thing is actually to search in every nook and cranny and to make sure that there is no chometz. Obviously, there's been advanced cleaning, and therefore the check should be a little bit easier. So normally this takes place on the eve before Pesach. It will be on Or Yud Nisan, on the night before Pesach, and that is the Zman. The Shulchan Aruch says that if a person checks for the chometz on any other night, so for example, a person is going away to a hotel for Pesach and won't be home on the night of Bedikas Chometz, if they're not selling their house, or if for whatever reason they're not going to be able to check the house on the 14th of Nisan at night, and they instead do it early on a different night, so in such a case, they do not make a bracha. Because the night that Chazal established for Bedikas Chometz is Or L'Yudalad, the night before Pesach. But the difference is in this year. The difference this year is we cannot do Bedikas Chometz. Now, why can't we do Bedikas Chometz on the night before Pesach? Because it's Friday night. Why can't we do Bedikas Chometz on Friday night? Because Bedikas Chometz must be done with a candle. It has to be done with a candle, and therefore we cannot do it on Shabbos because a Jew is certainly we're not allowed to light candles, but even carrying a lit candle, one is not allowed to do on Shabbos. So instead, we do the Bedikas Chometz a night earlier, and this is Chazal themselves established that should be done a night earlier, and therefore, even though we're checking on early Yud Gimel Nisan, we do the Bedika with a bracha. But in all other respects, it's identically the same. The Zman, that it must be done immediately the beginning of the night. Those who daven Ma'ariv with the minyan, as soon as you come home from Ma'ariv, the Bedikas Chometz should take place straight away. It's done in the regular manner with the candle, with the feather, with the spoon, etc. We do say a bracha, and at the end of Bedikas Chometz, we say the bittul. Now we say two bittles. We say a bittul chometz after the bedika, and we say a bittul after the biur, at the time of the biur, which this year is going to be different. But the bedika after the bittul after the bedika is regular like every other year, and we will say the kol chamira then, because what we are doing is we're being mevatel any chometz that we didn't find and that we don't know about. We can't be mevatel chometz we do know about because we need the chometz to eat on Friday and to eat on Shabbos. So this bittul, which is only for the chometz that we don't know about, that we do say, and we would say that as per regular. Any other chometz that we're going to be keeping to use on Friday night, or on Shabbos morning before the Zman HaIsur, has to be carefully put away in a sealed, hard-to-reach place to keep out of reach of mice and to keep out of reach of young children, because the last thing we need is that the young children get the chametz for Shabbos morning, the challahs, and then go make crumbs all in the house. So it should be sealed up. And in fact, the minig in many places was to get, because of the mice would get into the cupboards and everywhere. They would hang it on a string from the ceiling. They would tie it up and hang it so no one would be able to touch it. But make sure all the chametz is going to be used on Friday and on Shabbos is completely put away in a safely guarded place. Okay, so then we move on to Friday morning. Now, Friday morning is Erev Shabbos and Yud Gimel Nisan. So it's not the day before Pesach, it's the day before. It's Erev Pesach. So a few topics which are discussed in the Poskim. Number one, with regards to Shachris. So normally on Erev Pesach, we daven Shachris early. Okay, just actually before we go on to this, if a person forgot and didn't do the Bedikas Chometz on Thursday night, then the halacha is they have to do it on Thursday in the morning, in the daytime, also with a candle, unless they're next to a big open window. On Friday daytime, they have to do the Bedikah on Friday daytime, also with a candle. If they forgot to do it on Friday, then you need to ask a Rav if it's permissible to do the Bedikah on Shabbos with a goy. There are opinions say you could have a goy walk around with a candle. According to the Alter Rebbe, it doesn't seem that that's the case. According to Alter Rebbe, it seems the one is not allowed to do the Bedikah on Shabbos. And instead, one would do the Bedikah on the night of the Seder. So make sure you don't forget. Okay, so normally on Erev Pesach, we daven Shachris early. The Shachris should not schlep, we daven quickly. And we leave out Mizmor L'Soida, because Mizmor L'Soida, the Korban Toida, had chametz in it. Being that Friday is not Erev Pesach, so none of that applies. You could daven at the regular time. Now, we're going to burn chametz at the regular time, so therefore you shouldn't take too long. And Mizmor L'Soida is said as usual. With regards to working on Friday, so the halacha is that on Erev Pesach Mamish, after Chatzos, one is forbidden, rabbinically, one is not allowed to do work because it's already a quasi Yom Tov, because it was the time of bringing the Korban Pesach. So doing malacha, now, not all malachas are covered by that, but it means doing work like washing and haircuts and that type of thing. Before Chatzos, that depends on minhag, depends on custom. But all of that only applies on Erev Pesach Mamish. In this case, where Friday is not Erev Pesach Mamish, most poskim seem to say that there is no problem doing malachas and that type of work all day on Friday. There are some who say that it's a good thing, as we're going to see, so you don't forget from one year to the next and confuse that this year is different. But accepted halacha is that one is allowed to do washing and that type of thing, haircuts, etc. on the Friday, being that it is not Erev Pesach Mamish. Yes, Yossi. Okay. So now moving on to the Biur Chometz. So technically, in a normal year, we do Biur Chometz. We do it during the 5th hour of the day, the 5th halachic hour. And the reason we do it then is because during that time, you are still allowed to benefit from the Chometz. And therefore, the Chometz is still halachically considered yours. And you burn it during that hour so that by the beginning of the next hour, by the beginning of the 6th hour, it's already mavura from the world. It's already destroyed. Now, we know that on Erev Pesach in a normal year, whilst biblically you have until Chatzos, till the end of the 6th hour, to eat chametz and destroy chametz, but rabbinically, they said you can only eat chametz till the end of the 4th hour, and you can only benefit from chametz till the end of the 5th hour. So the question is, what about when we're doing Biur Chometz on Friday, which is not Erev Pesach Mamish? So technically none of that applies. Just as we're going to be eating chametz the whole day on Friday, even after the Soif Zman Achila, so too, technically one is allowed to do Biur Chometz the entire day as well. One would be able to burn the chametz later. Nonetheless, the halacha is that lechatchila, a person should still burn the chametz. The Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch quotes as well, that one should still burn the chametz before midday. It's interesting. The Shulchan Aruch says before midday. Rabbinically, on Erev Pesach, we burn the chametz before the beginning of the 6th hour. But it could be that here we're relying on because it's not Erev Pesach Mamish, we're relying on the biblical shear, which is before Chatzos, and that's when the chametz would be burned. Some suggest, the Mishnah Biur and others, that no, one should burn exactly at the regular time, the same time as they do every year, which is in the 5th hour of the day, so that by the time the 6th hour arrives, it's already burned. It's already taken hold of. And again, that's not so we don't confuse one year to the next. Obviously, if a person forgot to or got caught up and did not burn the chametz at that time, they are allowed to burn the chametz anytime up until Shabbos coming in, because it's not Erev Pesach mamish. But it should be burned at the regular time every year. Now, in a normal year, after we burn the chametz, after Biur chametz, we would say the second kol chamira, which is where we nullify not only the chametz that we don't know about and that we haven't found, but also the chametz that we do know about and that we did find. Obviously, we're not going to say that at this point in time, because you can't be mevatel the chametz that you still want to use. You still want to use that chametz on Friday afternoon. You still want to use that chametz Friday night and Shabbos morning as well. So the kol chamira is not said at all on the morning of Friday when we do Biur chametz. Instead, it's going to be said on Shabbos, which we'll see shortly. With regards to the Yehi Rotzon, in many nuschais of the Haggadah, and that's Chabad custom, is after we burn the chametz, we say a Yehi Rotzon, which is a Kabbalistic prayer, that just as we've destroyed the chametz, we ask that Hashem should burn up the klippos, the forces of evil and negativity from the world. There are different customs what to do in this type of kriyas. I saw brought down that the Rebbe said it at the time of burning the chametz. So not at the time that the bittul is said on Shabbos day, but rather at the time of when we burn the chametz, because in fact in that tefillah we say just as we are burning the chametz in smoke, so to Hashem should burn up the klippos in smoke. So the Yehi Rotzon will be said at the time we burn the chametz on Friday, but no kol chamira. I just have a question over here. At night, we say the bracha when we do Bedikas Chometz, and we will say the kol chamira afterwards. And in the daytime, we don't say the second kol chamira. That will be said on Shabbos, but we do say the Yehi Rotzon tefillah at the time that we burn the chametz. Okay, if we said if one forgot to, one could do it later. I'm going to leave the sale of chametz for now. We won't go into the details of that because it's quite interesting, but it's more negeh for the Rabbanim. But basic point is that we sell our chametz as usual, but instead of the sale normally, which happens on Erev Pesach mamish, this year the sale will be done on Friday. Now, the most Rabbanim follow the halacha that the sale is done also at the regular time, which is during the 5th hour at some stage, and therefore one must make sure to meet that deadline that they've sold their chametz or empowered the Rav to sell their chametz by that time. So make sure it's done before. But maybe we'll come back and talk about that if we have a bit of time afterwards. So with regards to Seder preparation, this is an interesting idea. There's a halacha which says that one is supposed to start the Seder at the earliest possible time, as close to the beginning of the night as possible, and that's so that the children don't fall asleep and they're awake to ask the manishtana. So one has to start at the earliest possible time, which means that the table should ideally be completely set, except the kara, that some people have the custom of setting up the kara themselves when they come home from shul. But otherwise, everything, the tablecloths, or whatever you put on the table should already be ready. But the problem is, in such a kviyos, we've got Shabbos in between. So what do you do? So interesting, there are Svarim Poskim who write that if it's possible to have a separate room that you're not going to use, if you can have your Seder room, your dining room, blocked off and set up completely from Erev Shabbos, that's the best thing to do, and eat your meals elsewhere. Eat your meals in the kitchen, right? Or eat outside or something like that. That's if it's possible. If it's not possible to do, so then you have to do the preparations on Motzei Shabbos as we're going to see. But whilst there are certain things that can be done on Motzei Shabbos, on Yom Tov, in terms of preparation, there are certain things that cannot be done on Motzei Shabbos. They cannot be done on Shabbos, certainly, because you're not allowed to prepare on Shabbos for Motzei Shabbos, and some of these things involve malachos. So there are certain things that must be prepared on Friday. One of them is the zroya. The zroya, which we customarily is roasted. The zroya is a roasted chicken bone, or those people who use a lamb shank. It's roasted. We do not eat the zroya at the Seder. One is not allowed to eat, certainly by Ashkenazim, but everybody. No one is allowed to eat the zroya at the Seder because it's a zeicher for the Korban Pesach. We don't want to look like we're bringing a Korban Pesach on outside of the Beis Hamikdash in Chutz Haaretz. So the zroya, and on Yom Tov, you're only allowed to cook foods that you're going to eat on Yom Tov. So the zroya is not going to be eaten, right? We need it for the Sedarim. So what you have to do is you have to make sure you can't roast it on Shabbos, obviously. So the zroya must be prepared on Friday, must be roasted on Friday. The egg is different. You could boil the egg on Motzei Shabbos if you want, because our custom is we eat the egg at the Seder. So that's fine. It's going to be eaten. You could cook on Yom Tov to eat. If one forgot to roast the zroya before Shabbos, then they can roast it on Motzei Shabbos Yom Tov, only if they are going to eat it during the daytime. They can't eat it at night, but they can eat it during the day, the first day of Yom Tov. And then obviously on the second night, you'd have to roast a new one and have to eat that one on the second day. During the daytime, you can. You can't eat it at the Seder. At the Seder, we can't eat the zroya. The following day, you are able to. But better to do the zroya before. With regards to maror, with regards to grading maror, there's a machloikas achronim. And the Alter Rebbe, like the Magen Avram, takes a stricter approach that one is not allowed to grate maror on Yom Tov because it's uvdin decho, even if it is done with a shinui, even if it's done in an irregular manner. And therefore, according to the Alter Rebbe, one would have to grate the maror if they want to eat it grated. Would have to grate the maror before Shabbos, seal it nicely so it keeps its freshness. If one failed to do that, then on Yom Tov at night, you can chop it with a knife. You can't grate it, but you could chop it into small pieces with a knife, which might not be so pleasant to eat. Make sure it's grated beforehand. There are other poskim who say that one could grate it with a sheet on Yom Tov, but as I said before, according to Alter Rebbe, one is not able to grate the maror on Yom Tov. Instead, it must be grated in this year before Shabbos. So those two must be done. With regards to making salt water, as far as I recall, it's not a problem according to the Alter Rebbe, but there are poskim who say that it's a problem to make the salt water on Yom Tov. And therefore, according to them, one should make the salt water. You can't make salt water on Shabbos because it involves an Isur D'Rabbanan, and also you're not allowed to prepare on Shabbos for Motzei Shabbos, for Yom Tov. So according to those poskim, one should make the salt water beforehand. But according to Alter Rebbe, one can make the salt water on Yom Tov after Shabbos is over. You can. And as we said, whatever else you can do to prepare beforehand is ideal. Now, one of the things, and I'm sure most balabustas are going to do that, is to pre-cook the food. Instead of on Motzei, because you can't start cooking the food until Shabbos is out. So you don't want to leave it till then to start cooking the food and hope it's going to be ready for the time of Shulchan Orech, right? So if it's pre-cooked and you just need to warm it up on Shabbos, that's on Motzei Shabbos, on Yom Tov, that's probably better. But whatever can be prepared is better. If you do have a separate room, great. If you don't, so then as soon as Shabbos is over, we'll quickly get everything prepared to start the Seder. Okay, moving on now to Friday night. So this is now Yud Daled Nisan. This is now moving into Erev Pesach itself. And the big issue with regards to Shabbos is the Shabbos meals. There is a mitzvah and obligation to have 3 meals on Shabbos. Shabbos by night, Shabbos by day, and then a Shabbos Shudas, which we'll talk about. And at those meals, certainly at the first 2 meals, one must have pas. One must have bread. Now, the problem is that obviously the house is by this point completely Pesachdik, so we don't want to have chametz in the house, bread, because it's going to make crumbs, and that's not a good idea. On the other hand, you can't do without. And we'll talk about some other ideas, eitzes, later what to do. But practically speaking, for those, the best advice is to, in the Shulchan Aruch actually talks about the Shabbos Suda. The Shulchan Aruch talks about situations that a person would be cooking in their chametz dika kelim. People would cook for Shabbos using chametz dika kelim. And the Shulchan Aruch says, therefore, you have to be careful not to cook things that are going to stick to the pot, because otherwise you won't be able to properly clean it. And then that chametz will be with you on Pesach. So you'd cook with your chametz kelim, things that are easy to clean. You would serve that, and then you would wash it up and put it away. The Achronim bring that it's not advisable to do that, especially now that we have full Pesach kitchens, etc. So by this point in time, the Suda for Yom Tov, unless you have a Shabbaton, the Suda for Shabbos will be cooked in Pesach Dika Kelim, served either on Pesach plates or on paper plates. My personal view is the paper plates are more pragmatic for this Shabbos, except for those balabustas who say chas v'shalom to use plastic on Shabbos, but it's definitely more practical, and that would be eaten inside in the house. The chametz will be eaten outside. Now, when we eat the chametz outside, so ein kiddush ela b'makom suda, the kiddush has to be said in the same place that you're going to eat the kibetza size of challah. Just interesting, when we sell our chametz, the Shulchan Aruch says that one has to leave over enough chametz for the 2 Shabbos sudas. Now that becomes each person to be yoyt to the Shabbos meal has to have a kibetza volume, which is about a volume of 57 grams, approximately, of bread at the meal. So you don't want to overbuy. but you've got to make sure there's enough for everybody. So you kind of would estimate based on how many people you have in the family, and buy exactly just enough metzumtzum. There's enough for everyone to have their kibetza of chometz. Personal tip: we use pita breads at home because it has less crumbs than a challah, and that makes less problems. But you should measure out enough for each person to have exactly what's required, because if you have any leftover, then that becomes just more of a problem how to deal with it afterwards. So the suda will be cooked Pesachdik. Outside, or if you have a separate room that you're going to seal off for Pesach, or in that room, you would make Kiddush. And if you're using a Pesach becher, that's fine. But just after you make Kiddush, put it away from the chametz. Then you would have the chametz. You make hamoitzi outside or in that room. And after everyone's finished that hamoitzi, obviously that's when we do the dance to brush off all the chametz. Men, remember to brush out your beards, because it's a place that unfortunately catches a lot of crumbs. So brushing off the clothes, brushing off, and then before actually eating, so one should go inside that handles chametz with their hands. And we know on Pesach chametz is asur b'mashu, to eat even the tiniest bit of chametz. So one should, in a bathroom somewhere else, wash our hands thoroughly. If you're going to be eating on Pesach kalim, certainly one needs to wash and clean out their mouth thoroughly, and that's why I said it's better to use plastic, because it avoids that problem. One would clean out their mouth, wash their hands thoroughly, and then inside they would go and make their suda. Now, when we do this, you have to have in mind, when you wash, you have to have in mind that you're going to continue the suda indoors as well, and that way there's no issues with regards to benching. Interesting halacha.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi, when you have a moment?
Yes.
Sorry to disturb. So when you mentioned about leaving over chametz from your Biur chametz for the Shabbos sudas, have you seen as bedavka that you can only have for the Shabbos sudas and no other chametz on Friday?
Okay, good question.
Or not to worry about that?
So if you look in the strict lashon of the Shulchan Aruch, it says you should be meshayer, it's the lashon of the Gemara. You should leave over for the Shabbos meals. Now, technically, it sounds like you're only allowed to have chametz on the Friday night meal and the Shabbos meal, and that's it. What about Friday afternoon? So whilst there are people who are machmir, the most of the poskim and contemporary practice is that one can have chametz on Friday afternoon. But again, one has to be careful that you're not overbuying and you're not left with a lot afterwards that you're going to then have to dispose of in one way or the other. But yes, one is allowed to have chametz on the afternoon of Friday. One can have chametz if those have mazonis before davening on Shabbos morning as well. That's okay as well. But the concerns of crumbs and the concerns of what to do with leftovers would remain nonetheless. Okay, so interesting discussion is what about kitnius? So obviously for Sephardim, kitnius is not a problem on Pesach. For Ashkenazim, we don't have kitnius on Pesach, or from the Zman HaIsur, from the time we're no longer allowed to eat chametz on Erev Pesach, we don't eat kitnius as well. But unlike chametz that you're not allowed to own on Pesach, you are allowed to own kitnius on Pesach. You're allowed to own kitnius. So the poskim discuss the possibility of, if you've got separate kalim, not your Pesach kalim, but separate kalim, could you make kitnius and eat that for your Friday night meal and Shabbos morning meal? And the answer is technically yes. Practically, it's not the best idea to do. But if you want to have snacks, if you want to give the kids a packet of bamba or something, which is a chash kitnius, or popcorn or something like that, you could have that on Friday afternoon, Friday night, and Shabbos morning, and you don't have to go crazy about the crumbs, because if there's any left over, there's no problem to own kitnius on Pesach. Okay, so now we'll move on to Shabbos morning. So Shabbos morning, we daven early in the morning. This is Shabbos Erev Pesach Yud Daled Nisan. Davening has to be early to enable us to eat the Sudas Shabbos before the Zman HaIsur. Davening should be early. Not only should davening be early, but davening should be a little bit quicker. The poskim bring down that the chazan should not schlep out the davening. The davening should not be schlepped out with nigunim and tunes. However, there are some kehillos, some communities where they say piyutim on Shabbos Hagadol, and in such a kriyos, there's different customs. Some will not say it on the Shabbos because it schleps out the davening. Others will say it on the Shabbos before. And others will say the piyutim as regular, and each community would, I guess, follow their own custom of what to do. Just interesting, a quick quirky halacha. There were some places where the minhag was that when they would wish one another good Shabbos on Shabbos Hagadol, they would say Shabbos Hagadol Shalom. Shabbat Hagadol Shalom. So when do you do that? Do you do that the week before? Or you do that on. So as I said before, the miracle is still commemorated on the Shabbos before Pesach, which is Erev Pesach. So in all other regards, that is Shabbos Haggadah. With regards to the Haftorah, so there are different customs. The Chabad custom is there is a special Haftorah which is marked for Shabbos Haggadah, the Haftorah of Arva, and according to the Alter Rebbe, that Haftorah is only said when Shabbos Haggadah is Erev Shabbos Mamish. And you can look over there for the reason that he gives. But there are those who have the opposite custom. The Minhag, the Vilna Gaon was the opposite, that Haftorah would be said when Shabbos Haggadah fell on any other day except for Erev Shabbos Mamish. And each one has their own reason for that. But again, the Chabad custom is that we only say that Haftorah in such a Kliyus of this year, but each community will follow what their minhag is. Okay, so then we're finishing davening early, making sure that it's finished here in Melbourne. This man, I think the Soif Zman Achila is 11:25 in the morning, so it's a little bit late. Probably in Sydney, it's a little bit earlier than that. So davening has to finish enough time that people can get home and have their chametz by the morning Suda in sufficient time. So Shabbos Suda is going to be earlier than usual. And here, this is where, whilst this applies on Friday night as well, but this is where we're going to discuss what do you use for lechem mishnah. So we said before that you can have chametz, pita, challah roll, something, a small amount, and you would eat that outside or in a separate room. But what about in cases where you've got industrial settings? You've got an old age home, or you've got a yeshiva with lots of talmidim, or you've got a house with lots of kids and you're just paranoid about all the crumbs and everything like that. Are there other options of what we could do? So here we come to a question, is one allowed to use matzah? The matzah that they bought for Pesach, are you allowed to eat matzah at that point in time? The answer is no. There's an issur d'Rabbanan, whilst our custom is we don't eat matzah already for the entire month before Pesach, but there is an issur d'Rabbanan to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. The Alter Rebbe says that begins from Alois HaShachar. It begins from dawn on Erev Pesach. One is not allowed to eat matzah that could be used for the mitzvah at the Seder, which is lechem oini made of flour and water. So therefore, one is not able to eat matzah for this Suda. That's pretty much straightforward. Young children, if they're under the age, they don't know what it means to tell over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, so they are allowed to eat matzah. So if in the afternoon you've got little kids who are hungry and they need to eat something, you're allowed to give them matzah to eat. But anyone else over that age is not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. But that is regarding matzah that could be used for the Seder, which is matzah of lechem oini, flour and water. What about matzah ashira? Matzah ashira, as opposed to matzah lechem oini, poor man's bread. Matzah ashira means wealthy man's bread. That's got additives. It's egg matzahs. It's got apple juice in it, it's wine, that type of thing. So you cannot use that at the Seder. So there is no isur to eat that on Erev Pesach. However, the Ashkenazi minhag follows the Ramah, who says that we do not eat egg matzahs during Pesach. We don't eat egg matzahs during Pesach, and we don't eat it after the Zman HaIsur on Erev Pesach as well. So that's after the Zman HaIsur. But what about before? So before the Zman HaIsur, why don't we use the egg matzah for our hamoitzi instead of worrying about chametz and the crumbs? The issue is that because egg matzahs are made with juice and the like, the bracha is mezonos. And the question becomes, can you be yoytze your Shabbos Sudas with something which is mezonos? Now, there are differing opinions on this. The Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch, in the laws of Birchas Hanenin, writes that we know that pas hababa kisnin, if you have enough sufficient volume to eat, then it becomes hamoitzi and you have to wash and bench afterwards. A shear of kviyas suda. So the Alter Rebbe says in the Shulchan Aruch that if you were to eat enough mezonos cake, or in this case egg matzahs, if you were to eat a sufficient volume, then you could use that for the Shabbos meals instead of bread. And one would be yoytze with that. There's a Haggah, there's a note from the Alter Rebbe's brother, the Maharil, a fascinating note. And the Maharil writes that B'soif Yamav, towards the end of the Alter Rebbe's lifetime, the Alter Rebbe retracted or modified his ruling, and said that one can even be yoitze the Sudas Shabbos if they have less than that volume. If you have a kazais or a kibetza of that mezoinus bread, or in this case the egg matzahs, you are yoitze the Suda, even though you are only going to say mezoinus. Even though you're only going to say mezoinus. And indeed, in the winter fabrengens, when the Rebbe would fabreng on Shabbos, the Rebbe would eat, make kiddush, would have cake, and that's it. Till Motzei Shabbos, there was no bread. So we see that one can fulfill the mitzvah with mezoinus as well. And according to that Alter Rebbe, there wouldn't be a problem to use matzah ashira for the Shabbos meal. The Igros Moshe writes that in difficult circumstances, one could rely on doing that as well. But the minig Yisrael is that we still have chametz. But if it is difficult for a family, if you've got lots of young kids and you're very worried about concern of chametz, you could use egg matzahs for Friday night and for a Shabbos day, as long as you finish eating, for Ashkenazim, you finish eating before the soif zman achila. Okay, there is a discussion about whether the matzahs for Pesach are muktzah or not. Generally speaking, we say that they're not muktzah unless you have specially baked matzahs for the Seder, but otherwise the matzah is not considered muktzah. So then we come to the end of the meal. Once we finish the Shabbos morning meal, or at least certainly eating the chametz, the same thing would apply. We've got to wash our hands, clean out our mouths properly, but we now need to get rid of any remaining chametz before the zman of Isur, which is going to be the end of the 5th hour. So how does one do that? And again, going back, when one eats the chametz, the best thing is not to use plates. They do talk about, the Shulchan Aruch says that you should shake out the tablecloth. You go to a place, obviously if there's an eruv, and one could do that, or you shake it out in a place where people are going to trample. Because if people trample on the crumbs, they're rendered inedible, and therefore it's not a problem for Pesach. But for those who don't want to rely on that, there's different eitzes, but we want to get rid of the chametz. The practical thing is to flush it down the toilet to correct all the crumbs. If you do have larger pieces of challah, then you can break that up and you can flush it down the toilet as well. First of all, get it out of your property. It's not in your reshus anymore, and it's also rendered inedible. Okay, so at the end of the meal, when it comes to the zman, we'll talk about what you do if you've got crumbs on the floor, whether it's outside or in a room. If you're eating in a room that you're going to sell, not a problem. Lock up the room with all the crumbs in it. But if it's not an area you're going to sell, it's outdoors and you want your backyard. So then you've got to make sure it's clean from any crumbs. So once we finish that meal, or once we're ready to clean up the chametz, so at that point in time, one would clean up. Okay, so here we come to the issue of sweeping. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch said that one is not allowed to sweep their floor on Shabbos. However, that was during a time when floors used to be made of earth, and there was a concern that you would fill in holes, which is a problem of boina on Shabbos. But the Paskim write that nowadays, where all of our floors have proper floorboards or tiles and that type of thing, one is allowed to sweep on Shabbos. If one's outdoors, eating outdoors, that's more of a problem, and one shouldn't use a broomstick outside on Shabbos. Instead, one would just brush up with their hands or collect the pieces with their hands, and then obviously take it in a bag of some form or in your hand and put it down the toilet. That's with regard to sweeping. Important to remember the sweeping. Most people have a separate broom for Pesach. When you sweep up, use your chametz broom, and when you're finished with it, put it into one of the rooms that is going to be sold. Shake out all the crumbs into the toilet. Put the broomstick away in a place that is going to be sold. Okay, you should do a check before the soif zman. One should do a final check and make sure that there is no chametz. Shulchan Aruch says one is supposed to go outside, and at this point, one should also check their pockets. Right? Normally, at the time of Biur Chometz, we check our pockets because sometimes people put chametz in them. So at this point in time, we would check out or turn out our pockets, make sure that there is no chametz in there. That lolly that the kid put in the pocket last Shabbos when they were in shul from the ofruf, etc. Make sure that's all gone. And then we are going to say the bittul. Now, before that, I just put in something here over false teeth. Normally, our teeth don't need to be kasher. Teeth are part of the body, and therefore they don't absorb traits. They don't absorb chametz. But false teeth, and poskim also write down if a person has crowns or things like that, so that can be a problem. So some poskim write you should have separate false teeth for Pesach, If you don't have that, then you have to make sure they're very well cleaned. And in terms of kashering them, so some say that for 24 hours before the Zman HaIsur, you should not have hot chametz at all. You shouldn't have hot chametz. Whilst I'm talking about that, it's important. There's a mitzvah of kavod Shabbos and oinik Shabbos. Oinik Shabbos means you've got to eat well on Shabbos. So this, even though yes, it's Erev Pesach and it's busy, but it's not a Shabbos just to have cold cuts and one should still have choshev foods for Shabbos if they're able to do so. If they're not, and it's too difficult and too much of a panic, okay. But otherwise, one should try to still have Bedikas Shabbos meals. So with regards to the false teeth, if you don't have a spare pair, avoid eating hot chametz for 24 hours before the Zman HaIsur. They should be thoroughly cleaned out after eating the chametz, like everyone else would clean their regular teeth. Are you allowed to use a toothbrush on Shabbos or toothpick on Shabbos? So provided that a person will not bleed when using a toothpick or floss or toothbrush, and they don't use toothpaste and they don't apply water to the toothbrush, then one is allowed to brush their teeth. Similarly, if one has toothpicks or pre-torn dental floss, one is able to use that as well. And again, if you could do that without bleeding. All right. So then we get to the bitur. At this point in time, before the end of the 5th hour, that's when we do the second kol chamira. That's when we do the second bitur, and that includes all the chametz that we know of, we don't know of, we found, we didn't find. What if a person still has chametz at that point in time? What do you do then? So we said, if it's small enough quantity, you could flush it down the toilet, great. What if you can't? And in times of Shulchan Aruch, they didn't have flushable toilets. The Shulchan Aruch says you should give it to a goy. A goy you can give it to, and they, as a matana, as a gift, you cannot sell the chametz on Shabbos. Right? You can't sell chametz on Shabbos, but you could give it to a goy as a gift. So if you realize you didn't sell the bottle of mashka, right, you could give it to your next door neighbor, or flush it down the toilet. Okay, so we say the bitul, the kol chamira, then we move on. So then we come to mincha. So mincha, normally we daven mincha later, mincha ketana time. On this day, in fact, this was mincha gedola. This was the time of the year in the Beis Hamikdash where the afternoon tamid was brought at the earliest opportunity, which is mincha gedola. So there are those who have the minhag to daven mincha gedola on Shabbos of Erev Pesach, and certainly to daven it earlier because there's still things that we need to do. Our minhag is that we say the Haggadah. Interesting. Some communities I came across we say from Avadim Hayinu after Mincha. Some communities will not say that when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, but it's very clear from the Alter Rebbe. It's very clear in the Sefer HaMinhagim that our custom is we still say the Seder Haggadah from Avadim Hayinu until the Chaper Al Kol Avonisenu after davening Mincha, and that is followed by the Seder Korban Pesach, right? Because the Zman when they would bring the Korban Pesach was after the afternoon Tamid. And therefore, as a zeicher, we would say the Seder Korban Pesach on Shabbos in the afternoon. And that's pretty easy to manage. And we'll talk about resting in a moment. Then we come to the issue and a dilemma that many poskim have, and that is about the Shalosh Shudas. We have a mitzvah, an obligation to have 3 meals on Shabbos. Now, I know in Chabad, we're not big on the Shalosh Shudas thing, right? But as we saw in Hayom Yom, the one must still eat something, right? So there are those who follow the highest standard in halacha, who don't have Kabbalistic considerations, and they will, on a regular Shabbos, wash for all 3 Shabbos meals. Now, ideally, the Shabbos meals should be Friday night, Shabbos morning, and Shabbos afternoon after Mincha, after midday. But in such a time, Erev Pesach, we got a problem. We said, matzah you're not allowed to have, the whole Erev Pesach. Chametz you're not allowed to have after the Zman HaIsur. So what do you do in such a case? And egg matzahs you can't have either. So what do you do in such a case? So there are different eitzes which are brought in the poskim. Some say that in such a year, you don't have a Shalosh Shudas with bread, right? Instead, you would have other things. For those who do eat gebracht, those who eat knedlach, you would be allowed to eat knedlach because a knedel you can't be yotze matzah with. So you'd be able to eat cakes and things made out of gebracht and use that as a mazonis for your Shalosh Shudas. Obviously, we don't do that. That's not our minhag. We're careful with shruya, and that applies from the zman of the isur achila of chametz already. So we can't do that. So instead, one is able to have meat, one is able to have fish. That's the next best thing because these are still choshev foods. It's a liftan. And if that's not possible, one can have mini tagim, one can also have fruit and the like. Now, all of these are acceptable opinions in the Rishonim for any Shalosh Shudas of the year. Normally, people are mahader to have bread, but in such a case, we certainly can rely on those other opinions. And in the afternoon, one can have fruit or vegetables and the like, with the exception of a certain number of fruits, because our minig is that just like we don't have matzah on Erev Pesach, we don't have any of the minim that we use for maror, or in the charoises, which would include apples and pears and things like that. Nuts, we would not have on Erev Pesach, and one wouldn't be able to have them. But you could have an orange, you could have a banana. In fact, I believe there was one year, I don't know the year, the mumchim will correct me, that the Rebbe fabrengt. There's a problem also that you're not allowed to, obviously mashke is chometzdik, you can't have mashke. Wine is a problem, as we're going to see, one is not allowed to drink wine in the afternoon of Erev Pesach, and the Rebbe fabrengt with having a banana and water. And that's so you can have that as a shalosh shudas, and that's fine. For those who want to be mahader and be able to have bread at both at the shalosh shudas, so the poskim bring an eitzah of dividing one's morning meal before the zman ha'isur. So they would wash after davening, make hamotzi, eat their morning meal, and that should be with the chashav of foods. Then they would bench, and then they would pause. Some poskim say you should leave the house and go for a walk. Others say you should wait half an hour, 15 minutes or something. And then you would wash again, and you would have bread for your shalosh seudos meal. Again, being careful to finish in time. Now, some people don't like this for a number of reasons. First of all, there could be a problem of benching in order to eat more. So you're going to cause yourself to make a bracha that might not have been necessary. The other problem is that it's before chatzos. It's before midday. How can you have a shalosh seudos before midday? So some say the best thing is to do that, and then in the afternoon rely on the other opinions to have some fruit or something else in the afternoon. Here we have a fascinating Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham writes, quoting from the Zohar, the Rashbi. I'm actually just going to find the nusach if I can. We know that in Hasidic circles, they say that we're not necessarily mahader, although I did say we should eat something. But you've probably all heard of this idea of saying chasidus. That one can say words of chasidus and be yoytze the shalosh shudos by saying words of chasidus. Right? Everyone heard that before? So whilst not necessarily advisable, but it definitely has a basis. The Magen Avraham here in the laws of Erev Pesach, which falls out on Shabbos, so I'll find it now. The Magen Avraham quotes from the Zohar, Chelek Gimel, volume 3, 95a, and there it says that the Rashbi, when Erev Pesach fell on Shabbos, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would be doiresh in the Maaseh HaMerkava. He would teach his students about the Maaseh HaMerkava, the Kabbalistic teachings of the divine throne and the chariots of the angels, and that is how he would be yoytze the shalosh shudas at that time. And the Magen Avraham brings this in Shulchan Aruch as a halacha. So one could rely on that as well, if you're of the caliber of the Rashbi, that you could be doiresh in Maaseh HaMerkava. But that's there are other eitzes. One should be careful to eat something. Also, it's going to be a long time till you eat the Shulchan Aruch, so it's good to eat something. But around that, there are other problems. One is not allowed to have a meal on Erev Pesach. It's asur min adin, asur midrabanan. One is not allowed to have a meal on Erev Pesach after the 10th hour, from 10th hour and onwards, from Samach Mincha, which is from the 9th, beginning of the 10th hour. The reason that's a problem is that one needs to eat the matzah with an appetite. And if you're already full because you've just fresh and had a big meal late Shabbos afternoon, you're not going to be eating the matzah with an appetite. So one should be careful. One is not allowed to have a meal at that time, which means one is not, for those who do have mazonis, that type of thing, one is not allowed to have mazonis like matzah balls and that type of thing in the afternoon. And even those who have fruit and meat and fish and the like, which we do for the shalosh shudas, should be careful not to have a lot, because you've got to have the appetite for the matzah. One is similarly not allowed to drink wine. And the reason is because wine is soyed alev. Wine, Chazal tell us, satisfies, it fills up a person, and you'd also have a problem having an appetite for the Seder. Interesting, that's only if you have a little bit of wine. If you have a lot of wine, that makes you hungry, apparently. But because we're not bucky what's a lot and what's a little, so therefore one should not have wine in the afternoon after of Erev Pesach. Okay, then we get to Motzei Shabbos, which is of course Pesach night. So the first thing is, men obviously are going to go to shul and daven, but anyone who is staying home not only before they do malachos, but before they do any hachana, any preparation for the Seder, must say Baruch Hamadu ben Kodesh LaKodesh. So that's the lady, the girls, or young kids, anyone who was at home, before they do any Seder preparations whatsoever, even if it's not a malacha, Maseh Baruch Hamadu Ben Kodesh LaKodesh. And the women light Yom Tov candles, and then begin the preparations for the Seder. Now, for those who have pre-cooked everything, that's an easy one, because pre-cooked, you just need to put it into the oven or the stove to warm up. If you're going to start cooking fresh on Motzei Shabbos, which you could do, I mean, that's what they did with the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach, they could only start cooking that night, so you could do it. However, it's got to be ready. It's got to be ready in time for the Shulchan Aruch of the Seder. And in fact, some poskim write, you have to do the Seder a little bit slower than usual to allow time for the food to cook or to heat up to be ready. But at the same time, on the first night of the Seder, we still have to finish Afikomen before Chatzos. So therefore, preferable is probably just to have food ready cooked that you heat up, and it avoids that problem. For the men, when we daven Ma'ariv, we say the Havdalah in Ma'ariv, Vatadienu, which is printed in the Siddur. And then again, when we come home, we should start the Seder as soon as possible. Now, unlike in a normal year where everything is set beforehand, this year we can't prepare on Shabbos unless you prepared before Shabbos, but you can't prepare on Shabbos. So the preparation has to be done. So if some of the legwork could be done by the young kids before the father comes home from shul, great. If it can't, then one should minimize the setup necessary so you can get cracking and get to the Seder as quick as possible. So maybe you won't put out all your, even the Shulchan Aruch says you should decorate the table with all the beautiful kalim and things like that. Then maybe it will be a more simple table in such a year. But you do need to prepare a place to recline. And of course, we need to prepare the matzahs and the kaira and everything to go as quickly as possible so that the Seder can still start as soon as possible, especially now that it's before the change of the clocks and therefore it's late enough as it is. That raises the point about what about sleeping on Erev Shabbos? We said you're not allowed to prepare on Erev Yom Tov. You're not allowed to prepare on Shabbos for Motzei Shabbos. So you're allowed to have a sleep on Shabbos afternoon to be able to be awake at the Seder. It's a hachana, it's preparation. You put the kids to sleep. So poskim say one is allowed to sleep on Shabbos afternoon, but one should not verbalize, they should not say that this is being done. You know, you told the kids, if you want to stay up at the Seder, you have to have a sleep now. Right? One shouldn't say that. He's saying we're having a Shabbos afternoon rest. And that's fine. You can have a Shabbos afternoon rest. And that's not a problem. Okay. And then finally, just one other change, and that we'll conclude with, is that in the concluding bracha of the Magid, the bracha Ga'al Yisrael, we say a tefillah that after we've told over Yetzias Mitzrayim, we ask Hashem to send us Mashiach, bring us back to Yerushalayim, and there we'll be able to bring the karbanos, because if we're sitting by the Seder already by that point in time, the Ezras Hashem will be in Yerushalayim. But if we're at the Seder at that point in time, we don't have a Korban Pesach. So we ask Hashem to take us back to Yerushalayim, and we say normally, V'noichol sham min apsachim umin azvachim umin apsachim. We'll eat from the zebach sacrifices and the psachim. Now, the Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch, but in the Haggadah primarily, says that when Erev Pesach is Shabbos, and therefore the Seder is on Motzei Shabbos, we switch around the order. And instead of saying V'noichel sham min azvachim min apsachim, we say min apsachim umin azvachim. Why is that? Because the Korban Pesach had to be eaten al hasoiva, when you were already full. So when they brought the Korban Pesach, they would also shech the Korban Chagiga, a festival sacrifice, and they would eat that at the meal to fill up at the Seder, and at the end, everyone would have their kazayis of the Korban Pesach. So in a normal year, the order would be min azvachim umin apsachim, because the Pesach comes at the end. So in such a kvius, whilst the Korban Pesach is doiche, can be brought on Shabbos, the Korban Chagiga cannot be brought on Shabbos. Instead, it would be brought on Yom Tov. So in such a case, they would not be eating a Chagiga before the Korban Pesach. So in such a case, we would reverse the order and say min apsachim, and then min azvachim, later in Yom Tov, we would have the zvachim, but not at the Seder night itself. And that's the halacha, that's the Alter Rebbe brings in the Siddur, in the Haggadah, that we do change the order. He then brings an opinion that the order should not be changed. Why is that? Because in that bracha, we're not talking about this year. We're saying kein yagienu, that Hashem should bring us next year, and then we will eat min azvachim min apsachim. And next year won't be on Motzei Shabbos. And therefore, we would still have the Chagiga and then the Korban Pesach. So you shouldn't change the order. What if we know from our calendar that next year will be on Motzei Shabbos? So even still, one should not change. And the reason is because whilst now we use a fixed calendar, when Mashiach comes and the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, they will go back to determining Rosh Chodesh based on witnesses sighting the moon. And therefore, the Beis Din may or may not declare Rosh Chodesh on a day that leads to Pesach, Erev Pesach being Shabbos. So it might not happen. right? But certainly so, we're standing already into Chodesh Nisan, and Be'ezras Hashem, Mashiach will come before we come to Pesach, and the Korban Pesach will be brought on Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash, as the halacha indeed is, albeit with some differences and changes, but that's for next week's year on Sunday night. You can join us. We're going to talk about the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. But then we will not have the Korban Chagiga. So we should ask Hashem that already this year, Yagienu, we should bring us to celebrate the Yom Tov of Pesach in Yerushalayim and HaKodesh with the Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi, the Noichel Sham, and they will eat min Pesachim, min Azvachim. We'll have the Korban Pesach and then the Korban Chagiga a little bit later in the Yom Tov. So wishing everyone a kosher and a freilichen Pesach. Important to remember that. Of course, we want Pesach to be kosher and do all the preparations, make sure there's no Shabbos Chometz and everything's clean. We have to remember also it should be a freilichen Pesach. It should be joyous. And that's one of the best things about this year, is that normally we're running to the last minute, and by come time to the Seder, everyone's exhausted and tired, especially the balabustas who work so hard in the kitchen. This year we have a day off. This year everything's prepared beforehand, and on Shabbos it could be Bab Menucha, we have comfort and rest. Everyone can have a rest and come to the Seder like a mensch. And wishing everyone a good Yom Tov and a kosher and a freilichen Pesach.
Very nice.